So we're going to read Isaiah 58, and we're going to read to verse 10, and then we're going to switch over to 61, 1 through 4. All right, let's read. Cry aloud. Do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgment of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. They say, why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have take no knowledge of it? Behold, in the days of your fast, you seek your own pleasure and oppress all your workers. Behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. Now, verse 5, is such the fast that I choose a day for a person to humble himself? Is it to bow down his head like a reed, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? And when you see the naked, to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer your cry, and he will say, here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and the speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness and your gloom be as the noonday. Now switch over to 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and the garment of praise instead of the faint spirit, that they may be called the oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastation of many generations. These are God's words. Let's pray. God, we're thankful for this time of getting into your word. And I just pray right now that if anybody is skeptical, if anybody is here today and is just has put their hope in something, or have put their peace in something, and they've seen it dry up, that they've seen that their hope and their peace is not found in the things that they've been putting their peace and hope in. I just pray right now, Lord, that they would allow your Spirit to speak to them, that you would be their hope, that you would be their peace. In your name, amen. All right. So a couple things that I want to address today. So Advent. When we talk about a time of Advent, a lot of people, if you're not used to the church calendar, I grew up in the church my whole life, and I never ever heard of Advent. I grew up in an evangelical church, and in the evangelical church, when I hear the word Advent, I would just be like, "What? I have no clue what that means. I have no dictionary, nothing that kind of comes up in my head of what it is." And as I grew older and older, and as I studied more and more, I realized that there is, with all churches that are Orthodox, whether if you have the Roman Catholic Church, or you have the Russian or Greek Orthodox, or any of these older churches, they preach from this church calendar, okay? And so with the church calendar, they actually have texts. certain kind of scriptures that they read every single week at a different time. So they actually have A, B, C, D. They have a whole bunch of different things that this year it's A, okay, Advent week, and they have certain kind of verses, and they stick to that calendar. And we kind of follow it loosely. We celebrate Easter and we celebrate Christmas, and we look at those times as times that are important to Christians. But for those of you who have grown up within the church and you haven't heard of Advent, Advent is this beautiful time. It started for us last week, the time of Advent. And in the time of Advent, all Advent is it's waiting. It's that we are finding and taking a moment and pausing and saying, before we celebrate on December 25th, Jesus's incarnation of God becoming human flesh, there is this thing that we want to connect with to what the people of God have always connected with. Okay, not only the people of God that are Christians, but the people of God that were the Israelites. That the Israelites, through this time, as we look in the Isaiah, we went through the whole year of biblical literacy, and we talked about Isaiah. Isaiah was a honest poet. That's what prophets were. They were honest poets. They would constantly call the people of God back to where they should be, call them back and saying, you are the people of God, you should be living this way. But they would use poetry. They would, to kind of harken back to Emily Dickinson, this concept of, if you're going to tell truth, tell it slant, success in circuit lies, tell the truth too openly to every man be blind. That if I want to bring about truth that is hard to hear, it cannot just come straight forward, because people will use interpretation. So what do? You premeditate it. You use beautiful language that we see with Isaiah. Isaiah uses this lofty image to where you actually kind of have to interpret what he is saying. See, this is the thing. If I tell you to do a certain thing, you will find a way to interpret it in such a way to kind of get around it, right? Well, if Lola grew up, which she is doing, and if I tell her to clean her room, and I say, Lola, you go clean your room, and she goes back in there and she kind of cleans but doesn't, and she's like, Dad, you're going to be so happy with me. You're going to be so happy with me. And this is Lola that can speak now, okay? Come on, use your imagination, people. This is my daughter, okay? You're going to be so happy. I memorized what you asked of me. You told me to clean my room. Aren't you happy with me, Dad? You told me to clean my room, and I memorized what you said. I'm like, Lola, get in there and clean your room, right? And then I get back into her room, and she's playing music, and she's singing songs about cleaning her room. I'm like, okay, wait a second here. Okay, I told you to do that. And interesting things, we do this with God a lot. The things that he has made incredibly clear to us, we use ways of memorization or singing about instead of doing what we're called to do. Instead of obedience, we make up things. So what God does is he says, okay, if you're going to get deep into the meaning of the simple things of what I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide Isaiah, Ezekiel, all of these prophets, these very beautiful ways of discussing to where you would have to study, you would have to hear of what is he talking about. And so in the book of Isaiah, they call the book of Isaiah the fifth gospel, because the whole book of Isaiah is talking about the coming king, the anointed king, the Messiah, Emmanuel, the one that would take away the sins of the world. And so what Advent is the time of waiting for Jesus to show up as the newborn babe, as Jesus Christ, the one that was given to Mary and Joseph. And what that connects to is it doesn't just connect us to all of the different kind of churches that are throughout our whole world right now celebrating this time of Advent, but it directly connects us to the people of God in the book of Isaiah who were waiting for Emmanuel, who were waiting for the anointed king. So right now we're waiting. And you're like, well, we have Jesus. Yeah, to be sure. But there's these things that we have to kind of put on repeat that warm not only our hearts, but actually give us strength to our very soul. So we see right off the bat with Isaiah chapter 58. And so I want to talk about this part of Isaiah because right around these times, Isaiah 58, Isaiah 59, 60, 61, it starts bringing up the imagery of what it means to wait for God. And not only to wait for God, but what our response should be while we wait for God. So he goes on and he says in Isaiah, he says, God is not happy with the bare minimum of what you think he has required. That you are people that right now in this time of history, the temple was destroyed. It hasn't been rebuilt yet. They're waiting for God's next orders. And all they know is that they're called to fast. All they know that they're called to stay with the covenant of God and look and do the things that God had called them to do. But Isaiah says that God is afar off, not because he wants to be afar off, but he says that your iniquity has separated, that the bare minimum of what you do has separated yourself from God. So we see Isaiah 61 as something that is a fulfillment of when Jesus is coming. And so this series of adversity and Advent is to see what we're going to do today is to talk about the loosening and the unburdening and setting free, that though there is tons of adversity, that we come to a place to where there's a tightening in our lives, that before Jesus comes and moves and comes and actually delivers you, that there is a tightening around your soul, that there is a tightening around who you are. There's an anxiety around it to say, where is my hope and peace? So usually how Advent candles work, or how different days work, is they all have different themes. And so last week's theme was this concept of hope. And as we were finishing up the year of biblical literacy, we were looking at Revelation. We were looking at our hope. We were looking at when God comes back. And today we're going to be looking at peace, but it's going to be peace through justice. So there's going to be a kind of a mingling of hope and peace. And the interesting thing about Isaiah 61 of what we read, if you were Jesus Christ and it is your first time to preach a sermon, what text would you use? And for Jesus in the New Testament, the first text that he preaches from is Isaiah 61. He chose this, as we see in Luke 4, Isaiah 61, because it says, the Lord has anointed me. That is the word for Messiah. It means the anointed one. It means the chosen one. And so what we see with this beautiful representation of Jesus preaching his first sermon is that it was him, that it stretched forwards and backwards, but it anchored them in the present. It was them learning what it would be to experience the Messiah. So 3 things today that I would say. So the people of God are called to justice and their reward is peace, but 3 things. First, 1, what we believe is required. 2, what is required. And then 3, and lastly, what God requires. So what we believe is required, what is required, and what God requires. Okay, so we see this dark time of history. They're waiting for the Messiah. In Jerusalem, the temple has not been built up yet. And we come in at Isaiah 58. Let's look at just verse 6, and it says, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? Is this the kind of thing that I have been asking you to do while you are waiting for me? To loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed and the poor wanderer with shelter. When you see the naked, to clothe him, and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood. So here's this interesting thing. In the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah 58, we see this beautiful picture of what we are called to do while we wait for God. So they're in a time of adversity, and usually in our times of adversity, when we are going through a hard time, where do we usually look to? We look to ourselves. Right? When we're going through a problem, when anything's happening, it is so, there's this song by Keith Green, he says, it's so hard to see when my eyes are on me. And that's a very, very true statement when we're going through times of adversity. The people of Israel are going through a huge time of adversity, and they're trying to be faithful unto God. So what do? They say, I'm going to do a fast towards God. But here's their kind of fast. Their kind of fast is to not eat food, to basically do the bare minimum. When God tells you to do something, and you're saying, I'm just waiting to hear from God, to hear what's next for my life. This is the thing. If God's already told you something and you're not hearing something from God, God is usually wanting you to go back to the thing that he first called you to, right? And so what was the thing that he called the Israelites first to? He says, I have shown you, O man, what the Lord has required of you. To do justice, to do justly, to love mercy, to respond to people's misery, and to walk humbly before your God. And he says in chapter 58, he says, what you're doing is you're doing a fast, but you're doing a fast to pat yourself on the back. You're doing this fast, but you're not doing this fast. You're using this fast in such a way to leverage and say, God, look how good I am. Now deliver me. You are not actually becoming creatures of his love and mercy, but you're using his love and mercy as a bargaining chip to get your own way. This was the hard thing for the people of God to hear, that when Isaiah was saying to me, he was saying, you are doing all of these religious things, but you're doing all of these religious things for you. You're not doing these religious things for me because you want to know what I require when it comes to a fast. What does he say? When you are waiting to hear God talk to you again and you're not hearing something, God says, go back. This is why journaling is so important in your lives. If just taking down things that God has told you, writing them down and being like, man, I haven't heard from him in a while, going back, reading over and saying, oh yeah, God's called me to this. I've gone away from this. I want to look deep into what he, of what it is. And so what is required? Well, or what do we believe is required? Well, we believe that we're called to do all of these things, but what God calls us to is he says to do good, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. It's so interesting that we can take good things of God and we can change them to bargaining chips, or we can change them into platforms to make ourselves great, that we will take God's good things and we will puff ourselves up with pride. See, the children of Israel, they are prideful and they believe that the bare minimum is enough. And we've talked about this before, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm going to. There is the sin of commission and there is the sin of omission, right? The sin of commission, right, is when I do wrong towards someone, right? If someone asks me for the truth and I lie, if I do something wrong against somebody, if I transgress against someone, it is me actually doing wrong. The sin of omission is when I fail to do good. Now, here's the thing with religious people, and this is what we have to get. When we're waiting for the time of Advent and we're waiting for Jesus and our salvation to come near, what ends up happening, and this is what I would ask you today. Am I being a person that is focused completely and solely on not doing bad things? The sin of commission. Am I, as a Christian, just focusing on the things that I am not doing? We do this all the time. This is how denominations get formed. This is how church splits happen, because we create these laws and lists and we say, if we stick with this, we're good. And this is what happened with the children of Israel. They had their law book and they said, this is what is required of the fast. You have sackcloth, you have ashes, you're sad, you hunger. All of these things happen, but you do it in such a way so that other people think that you're holy and that you're trying to do it in a way that God looks at you and says, man, you're actually kind of good at this thing. You're awesome at not eating food. You know what I mean? Like, you're really, really good at that. And we're like, yeah, we are. Man, it's taken a lot of me not to eat that chip. You know what I mean? And it's this weird thing that we do with God, the bare minimum. That the bare minimum is we think is good and enough. And so we see that they are prideful and they think that the sin of commission. And the funny thing is God, as we'll see in the next few things, is he's saying, no, I say that when you're not eating, take the bread that you would be eating and you give it to the poor. Because you are wearing sackcloth and ashes, take the tunic that you would be wearing and give it to the poor. You see this? Because one is, okay, I can do this, God. I can not do things and you be happy with me. But when you call me to go out in mission, when you call me to actually do something, that's too much. I'm already doing this. I know you're calling me to do both, but hey, 1 out of 2 isn't that bad. You see how we do this? We do these games and it's so funny, and God doesn't let us do it. He sees the game, he gets deep into our hearts and he says, hey, let's reason together here. Let's talk about this thing. So what we believe is required is the bare minimum, that it's just the commission of not sinning, not doing and breaking the law, but we know that is indeed religion and not relationship. That this oppression will continue unless they do what is required. I think this is good. That sometimes God will give you uncomfortable grace. Okay? What do I mean by uncomfortable grace? This is what I mean. Sometimes God will allow you to wrestle with things that will make you uncomfortable, and you say, God, relieve this, make me comfortable, make me do this. And he's like, no, I'm not going to let this thorn in your side leave you, because I want you to learn that my grace is perfected in your weakness, that my strength makes you whole in this time, and I will allow you to keep on being oppressed if you will not learn. And this is not God being mean or hard. This is God knowing us and knowing that the way that we only can grow is allowing that the hope in other things to dry up. See, we're not people that work on instinct. Okay, we aren't. You are here today based upon hope and based upon peace. And hope and peace kind of mingle together in this really interesting way, because what hope is it's this expectation of coming good, that the reason why I came to church today was because I hoped that I would hear the words of life to not only nourish me, encourage me, but strengthen me so that I can be for San Francisco what I need to be for San Francisco, that I can be for my wife or my husband or my boyfriend or my girlfriend or whatever, my son or daughter, whatever it might be, that I can be those things for them. So you've placed your hope today in coming into church to do it. But also the mingling of peace. Peace is not just, peace is not just the absence of oppression. Peace is more than that. Peace is not just saying, man, today was a really, really, really hard day, and therefore I don't have that hardness that is happening anymore, and so because of that, now I have peace. No, it's saying that though you are experiencing adversity, that there is an ability, this concept of shalom, that there is ability to thrive in whatever landscape you find yourself. We sang joy to the world, right? And the concept at the very end, it's a beautiful, if you haven't read through the lyrics of Joy to the World, do it. It is a pleasure. But there is this beautiful thing to where it says, sing with resounding joy as far as the curse is found. And this song goes and it says, keep on singing of the gospel, because what's going to happen is thorns and thistles will be found no more, that the curse that has brought up all these horrible things into our lives will be reversed by the great gospel that we see and we preach about. And so what God is calling us to is he is calling us to be people that place our hope in him and not other things. And if you don't realize that your hope is in Jesus, he will allow uncomfortable graces to where he'll give you and allow you have the things that you've been putting your hope in, and they will turn to ash. They just will. He goes on and he says that in chapter 61, he says, he will give you beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. He is saying that you will have this thing. You will be putting your hope in certain kind of things, and they will turn to ash. And he says, hey, I'll take those ashes, and I'm going to give you something more beautiful, something more great. So First thing that we see is what we believe is required, which is basically the bare minimum. So when we're waiting on the Messiah, we say, God, do everything for us, make it happen. Actually, while I'm waiting, I will be a person that is just doing, basically looking as an appearance of not sinning, not doing bad, but I will not go my full way of what you have called me to do. So what is required? Well, this is what he says, and I'm going to read again. Is it not the kind of fasting that I have chosen? He says this. The first thing is to loose the chains of injustice. See, we've been talking a lot about justice, and we like justice because what justice is this concept of God making things that are wrong right. We've heard of this concept of social justice as we look at Martin Luther King Jr., right, as a person that marched against injustice, looking to set things that were wrong to right. Justice is making a comeback, okay? It really is, and especially in popular culture. You can't go on Facebook or read the news and not hear of some sort of justice organization going about it. But now here's the thing, and I want you to kind of look at this. I know if I ever protest, I know that if I ever created some sort of thing where I saw injustice, I know one thing that I never see, and this is just if I did it. I'm not calling out any other crowd, but if I did it, I know in my heart that I would put a sign up, and what the sign up would be, it would be whoever the other is, it is their fault, and let us protest against the other. But in this text, what we see is he ends up going on and he says, you want to know why there is injustice happening? It's because you're doing the bare minimum. I've called you not to just not oppress people, but I have called you to your time of not oppressing people to bless people and empower people. Now here's the thing. If I was walking around with a picket sign, I will tell you this is not what I would ever do. I would never have the protest and it have an arrow pointing down saying it is me and it is my fault for the oppression that is out there. I wouldn't do that. Because I am deceitfully wicked and I am being changed from glory to glory. But anytime we seek justice and protest, many people say it is the other, it is them, when really, and this is what I would say for myself, and this is not talking about anybody else. I don't want you to get this mixed up and say, what are you saying, Josh? And read between the lines. I'm just saying, when we look for justice, justice goes only so far to my own being, because I know at the end of the day, I am wrong. I am the problem with the world. That I have sinned, that I do the bare minimum, that I don't empower others, I don't love others, I don't care for others. And God is calling the church to be ministers of reconciliation, to not pinpoint who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed, but to say, how might I empower and how might I bring sight to the blind, to those who do not see that they're oppressing others. Or bring sight to the people that don't even know that they are oppressed. What does he say here? He says, I want you to fast. I want you to give up of your food, and I want you to give it up so that every other sense is heightened to serve another person. To loose the chains of injustice. And that's what Advent does. What Advent does is the time of waiting, what it does is it creates tons and tons of suspense. During the season where you're about to go around family and friends and see all of these people that are in your lives, what ends up happening is when we are waiting for salvation to come, there's this tightening that starts happening, and there are all these fears and all of these hopes that keep on going. And our job is this, that during that time for others, that we provide shelter, that we can loosen the chains. That we can loosen the chains of injustice by what? Providing justice. Not by just talking about justice, not just to be intellectually superior towards others, but actually doing things of justice. Not just not hurting people, right? I think that's the indictment of the church today, is that we just don't do anything. We're so neutral to what's going on in the outside world. And God's saying, no, this is the time to bring about true justice. And then he says, what else? He says, not only injustice, but untie the cords of the yoke or the burden, right? To see people that during this time are experiencing tons and tons of loneliness, tons and tons of frustration, anxiety, to see their load and open up a door for people, give them a smile, do whatever you can to say, man, you just cut me off. I'm not going to follow you for a couple miles and just, honk the horn. I'm not going to do that. No, I don't do that. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give people a break. I'm going to see that there is this tightening and frustration, that they have put their hopes in certain things. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that when you live your life out there and when you actually can just forgive people if they do a slight to you, what ends up happening when you forgive them a certain kind of debt, that you see that the yoke of bondage or the burden that they are carrying becomes lighter? That you have become a person that is not only doing justice, but are allowing yourself to experience burden and to experience injustice. I know that's not a popular subject, a little popular in San Francisco, but not a popular subject with the United States, because, hey, I got rights. You have rights, I have rights, these are my rights. And this is what God says to you gently, okay? When you become a Christian, you've given up your right to be better than other, and not only that, but to even be more equal. Okay? And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to indict your sense of worth, but what I'm saying is this, is that when we're calling, and I've said this before, when we're calling, or we're in a world that calls and asks of the church the bare minimum, which is to be tolerant, right? We've heard of that. That's all we want, tolerance, right? And then you see those bumper stickers, and they have like a cross and, an O and then a Jewish star, and they have have you seen those tolerance stickers? I'm not the only one, right? Okay, I've seen them. They're a real thing, okay? Tolerance. What we see that the world is asking is, church, can you be just tolerant towards the ways that we believe or whatever? I say no. And you go, what? What, Josh? No. And I say, this is the reason why I say no. Because tolerance is this side of this. If you're asking a person and you're saying to him, hey, will you just, it's this kind of prideful thing that, yeah, I will tolerate what you believe or your behavior. I'll tolerate those things. And the church, the outside world is calling the church just to tolerate a certain kind of behavior, almost kind of propping the church to be this moral superior or whatever. How are we called to be tolerant to people that we're called to serve? I am not above my Master Jesus Christ, and he did not come to be served and to tolerate other people. No, he came as a servant, and he loved other people. If anything else, the outside world is to tolerate us. I know it's not a popular message within the America, allegiance and all these things. And I love America, and I'm not going to diss it or whatever, but what I am going to say is this. As a Christian, as our allegiance is not to a flag or democracy ultimately, but our allegiance is to a king and a kingdom, I am called to serve and love others. And so this allows me to, when I see someone that is experiencing a burden, whether it's at work or whether it's whatever it is, I can let it go and I can take on that debt and I can take on that burden. Why? Because ultimately, the gripping and just penetrating and life-paralyzing debt of sin and that burden that was upon us, it's not on us anymore. The thing that is on every single person in the outside world that just paralyzes them from being able to do anything, this great and deep burden that they have, we no longer have because our life is now with Christ and that burden has been lifted. Therefore, what is their measly burden that I can help and give them a little bit of rest? Give them mercy. So not only to untie the yoke and take that yoke and put it on my back, but to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. So it's not only to loose, it's not only to unburden, but it is this concept of freedom. And here's the beautiful thing about freedom, and this is the beautiful thing about the Christian church. The height of freedom is not how free I can be, but being so freed up to empower other people and set them free. I think of Harriet Tubman. She had her freedom, right? She had her freedom, but she knew that the greatest, the ultimate freedom was not just for her to experience it, but to free others. That's our job. So in the time of this fast, the time of waiting, it is not us to just not sin, but us to do good. To do good. He says that you would that your hunger would feed, that your nakedness would clothe, that once you are made a peacemaker of the Son of Righteousness, it is then that you will fully be complete. So where do we go from here? Well, what we believe is required, which is bare minimum. What is required, which is true justice, true transformation, us becoming servants. And then lastly, well, what does God require? Because we know that what he said he requires, but this is the thing. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, especially during this time of Advent and Christmas, we must look and resist consumerism. Like contentment and generosity, the Apostle Paul says, if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. He then goes on to urge those who possess the wealth of this age, and he says, be generous and be ready to share. 1 Timothy 6:8. In an age enslaved to a consumerist acquisition, contentment and generosity are creative acts of resistance. To give regularly, to give joyfully, and to give generously to the church and the poor is an act of anti-consumerism. And it is the very bedrock of Christ-likeness, who, having the wealth of heaven, did not just do the bare minimum and just say, hey, I'm just going to stay up here and make sure you have an okay life. But he abandoned his throne and all of the wealth and jewels, became a servant, and not only a servant, but the foxes had holes and the birds had nests, but the Son of Man had no place to put his head, and he unburdened our brokenness to be like Christ. In Romans 12:2 it says, don't let yourself be squeezed into the shape dictated by the present age. Man, ads are getting better and better, right? Liturgy of what you need and how you need it. The algorithms are getting better and better of what you actually lack and what you need. And you are all waiting for maybe Christmas Day, or other people are depending on you for Christmas Day. But here's the amazing thing, that if we are to be doing what God truly requires of us, true justice, true mercy, true transformation, we must be antithetical to the way of this world. We must be defiant towards the things that are trying to shape us, the things that are trying to squeeze us, and saying, hey, do not be generous. Use your money here. Do these things here. So let's read the last part of verse 10. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with a pointing finger and malicious talk. I love this. If the church, if the people of God would just do away with pointing the finger. That should be a bumper sticker. No one would read it, but it's the best. Just do away with pointing the finger. You're the problem with the world. You're the problem with the world. I'm the problem of the world. We should have huge things with pointing fingers to this person saying, I'm a part of the problem. But we think, oh man, by doing the bare minimum, no, it's the world. It's these people. It's this church. It's what they believe over here. It's them who are of issue. And the malicious talk. And if you spend yourselves in behalf of hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, he says, when you spend your time doing that, then your light will rise in darkness and your night will become like the noonday. If you're experiencing, this kind of blues, quiet, San Francisco of when Christmas season comes and everything just seems kind of quiet. It's kind of nice, but it's kind of quiet here. People are gone. People are using their last bit of vacation hours to kind of be done with San Francisco for December. It's kind of nice. It's kind of quiet. But at the same time, if you're not looking at people and saying, how can I do justice, love justice? If I don't look in those ways, if I start looking at me and saying, well, what about my friends? What about the things that I need? What about these things? And in the time of waiting for God's salvation, if we look to ourselves, what ends up happening is we will stay in this point of darkness when God says, no. If you get out of yourself, and here's my plug, December 10th, we're going to be going to City Team to serve. If you're feeling this crippling of me, maybe God is calling you to do works of justice so that your countenance would be like going from night to the noon day. It is not your works that will save you, because they try to do really good things, but it's not your works to save you. What do we see that will save you? Well, chapter 61 brings us home. What God requires. This is what God requires. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. Okay? So in Isaiah, it talks about the people of God, they can't do it. That even when they are trying to fast, they can't. They only fast to get God to do what they want. And God says, no, I want a people that just do what I say because they love me and not by what they can get. And he says, I am going to deliver and come up a servant that actually can. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to preach the good news to whom? The poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Okay? He is to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. To comfort all who mourn and provide those who grieve in Zion. To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy for gladness instead of mourning, and the garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew and the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. So what does God require? Does he require a life of true justice, loving mercy, unburdening the ones that have burden? Does he require us to break all yokes of bondage so that people might be set free? Absolutely. And we're a part of that, absolutely. But it doesn't come from you and your own strength. Where it comes from the anointed king of what he says. He says, Jesus Christ has done all of these things for you. Therefore, it frees you up to do all of the things for a world that is dying and in the darkness and in need. What did Jesus do? Well, as we see that Jesus left the throne of God so that he can live and love and die for our sins. That he became poor so that we could become rich. There is from the 1830s in Scotland, this amazing man named Robert Murray McCheyne, and he preached on this very text. And he says this: it is more blessed to give than receive. Now, Christians, some of you pray night and day, this is what he was saying to us and to his congregation back then, night and day to be made branches of the true vine. You pray to be made all over made all over in the images of Christ. If so, you must be like him in giving. Though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor. Our objection: my money is my own. Answer: Christ might have said, my blood is my own, my life is my own. No man forceth from me. Then where should we have been? Objection: the poor are undeserving. Answer: Christ might have said the same thing. They are wicked rebels against my Father's law. Shall I lay down my life for these? I will give to the good angels instead of them. But no, he gave his blood for the undeserving. Objection: the poor may abuse my generosity. The answer: Christ might have said the same, yea, with far greater truth. Christ knew that thousands would trample on his blood under their feet, that most would despise it, that many would make it an excuse for sinning more. Yet he gave his own blood. He says, finishing, "Oh, my dear Christians, if you would be like Christ, give much, give often, give freely to the vile and the poor, the thankless and the undeserving. Christ is glorious and happy, and so will you be. It is not your money I want, but your happiness." Remember his own words. It is more blessed to give than receive. So because God is calling us to wait for him during the time of adversity and during the time of us feeling it, he is calling us to stop looking at ourselves and look to first him who has given everything for us, so that we might be able to look to others to serve and help and give. I want to end with this song. I always bring it out and use it in one of the more Christmas messages, and it's by Sufjan Stevens, and it's called "Justice Delivers Its Death," and it goes like this. And he kind of steals from "Silver and Gold," the Burl Ives version, and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and he goes like this: silver and gold, everyone wishes for it. How do you measure its worth? Just by the pleasure it gives here on earth. Oh, I'm getting old. Everyone wishes for youth. How have I wasted my life trusting the pleasures it gives here on earth? Then he goes, Lord, come with fire. Everyone's wasting their time, storing up treasures in vain, trusting the pleasures it gives here on earth. Oh, I see the end. Everyone's waiting for death. How do you measure its worth? Justice delivers its gift here on earth. Let's pray. God, we come before you right now, and we are so in awe of Jesus the Nazarene that we can look at our adversity and try to figure out how we could be unloosed from the chains that need to be broken. We can focus on how we can unburden ourselves. We can focus on how we can experience more freedom. But in our time of waiting, you are asking not for what we can make or what we can do on earth, but you are wanting our happiness. You are wanting us. You are requiring of us to accept the finished work of Christ. The true servant, the one that truly set the captives free, the one that truly empowers people. So, Father, today, as we take of your body and your blood that was shed for us, that Jesus Christ had to take on the sins of the world so that we who are the problem, we who think it's everybody else's fault but ourselves, could be made righteous. Thank you that you use adversity in the times of waiting to make your bride, your church, refined in the fire, that they might become loved ones of God and to serve a world that needs him. In your name, amen.